This episode of Twice Removed is brought to you by 23andMe. As you might remember from science class, there are 23 pairs of chromosomes that make up your DNA. Well, that's where 23andMe, a genetic testing service, gets its name. 23andMe allows you to have access to information about your DNA. You can find out information about your ancestry, your health, even your physical traits. To learn more about your DNA, visit 23andme.com. That's the number 23andme.com.
I can be many things. I'm Black, but I'm also many other things. If I didn't have all these tattoos, assassin would be a really, really good job for me.
Because
depending on what time of the year it is or what hair I decide to wear, I can be many, many things. I'm a spice blend. I'm gumbo. I don't know what it is.
Who you are.
Biological family.
My dad's grandfather.
My ancestry.
My family.
Cousin, twice removed.
Twice removed.
Twice removed.
Twice removed.
Don't worry, at least we all are together. Don't worry.
this is Twice Removed, the show that proves we are, in fact, one big family. Right now, there are two people in separate studios. What they do not realize is they're related. One of those people, our mystery relative, is listening in from somewhere in America. The other is sitting across from me right now. Would you please go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Sidi Azita Ibrahim. Born Sidi Azita Brand. You probably know me as Jean Grae. I'm a writer, a producer, a rapper.
I jack a beat from you, take a little bit of heat from you. Am I frightening you? Shall I continue? Take a light from you.
A chef, a minister now of a church, an engineer. Did I say that already? I don't know. I was a dancer in my first life. It's a lot of things. And my genealogy is exactly the same as my career. Many slashes.
Like I wasn't trying to tell. A little compensated, but I still feel hatred. Female, Black and young, so they want to strip me naked. But you'll never have me like none of my adversaries, but catch me in.
So, Jean, you were born in Cape Town, South Africa. But you and your family moved to the U.S. when you were very young. So tell me about that. What was that like, being from South Africa, but growing up in New York City?
Yes, being here as a teenager in America, there was always a question of, what are you?
And what would people assume?
So I was Puerto Rican for many years.
People thought you were Puerto Rican. You were not,
and I told them
actually.
I was Puerto Rican.
Oh, you would? You
yes.
told them?
Because it was easier.
Interesting.
It was easier. I don't have any other South African friends here, any other colored South African friends. So who do I relate to?
Well, let's talk about your mom for a minute. She was born in the 1930s, and she passed away a couple of years ago. Can you tell us a little about her?
She was born Beatrice Bertha Benjamin, which is the most 1934 name you've ever heard in your life, in Cape Town, South Africa. She was a jazz singer and composer, very much an activist. She did something called Nations in Me.
Nations in me.
Really singing about, the history of her being a quote, Cape-colored woman, and saying, I have so many nations in me. I'm not necessarily one thing, and that's beautiful, and I'm beautiful as me.
Family tree, I see that I'm the fruit of their love.
Now listen, about my mom. Her biggest dream, all she wanted to do was to say, I am these things. And she asked questions all of her life, trying to figure this out. And she couldn't really get a lot of information. And she was like, I want you to know. If I don't get to do this, please, you have to know. You have to find out. So it's for her.
In the land of my birth, You're told you're of no worth if you're black or have nations you.
Well, today, Jean, we are going to find out who your mother was, who you are. We've got 5 stories today that we hope will answer that question. And there's a theme running through these stories: labels.
That sounds perfect for me, because it's something that I've been trying to escape all my life.
Escape labeling.
Being labeled, yeah.
We have stories of labels people want, labels people reject, labels people create for themselves. So if you look over here on your family map, there you are on the left side. And then it goes through 50 people all the way till we land on your mystery relative way over on the right. I'm actually going to check in with him right now. Mystery relative, are you there? I can hear you, but Jean cannot. How you doing?
I'm tickled pink. I'm so excited to be rumored to be related to someone talented.
And do you have any message for Jean that you'd like me to pass on?
Sure. The message is justice will be served.
Oh, it's a good message. I like the optimism. Okay, so your mystery relative has a message for you, and that message is justice will be served.
Either that really sounds like someone I'd be related to, or that sounds like a threat. Justice will be served.
Okay, don't go anywhere. Soon enough, we'll be introducing you to live on the air.
There'll be no talk about color. We won't be concerned about race, for we're building a new nation with just one
All right, so Jean, for our first story today, we're going just one step on your family map, to your mom. She was born Beatrice Benjamin, and as you know, she changed her name later in life to Satima. This story is about a pivotal time in your mom's life. It intersects with one of the most brutal attempts in history to enforce labels: apartheid. It describes a legal system that used race to dictate just about every aspect of South African life. People lived under apartheid for half a century. It only ended in the 1990s. Now, Jean, you visited South Africa when you were in grade school. This was before apartheid ended, so can you tell me what that was like?
I do remember being on a train where it's the whites only and the colored section. And it's like I got in a time machine. And I mean, there's bathrooms and there's places you can't go. And then realizing that everyone there is used to that, and I have to come back and go to school now. And I'm like, I don't want to talk about your Rosa Parks or your Martin. I just did this. This is not, your textbook. This is happening now. It's happening right now.
You talk about South Africa was the first place you came to where people looked like you on the one hand, so it was almost like you're home. But on the other side,
I was like, I'm home, and my home is up.
Well, Jean, as you know, your mother was a jazz singer and composer. She was later nominated for a Grammy. She played with Duke Ellington. But she fell in love with jazz during apartheid. As a teenager, she found escape from apartheid in the mixed-race jazz clubs of the Cape.
It was so beautiful. I was a wild person, running off with these wild musicians.
That's your mom talking in a diner with a musicologist, Carol Muller.
There was all this mixing going on too. running around into the African community, running around into the white community. I'm just talking about something so warm, so real, so exciting. It just was natural.
That was nice to hear. That was really nice to hear.
Your mom's experience in the jazz clubs was very different from what you experienced on the train a few decades later. And that difference is rooted in the deeper history of colonialism in Africa. For hundreds of years, Europeans exploited Africa's people and resources. And then in the late 1800s, European powers came together and carved up most of Africa between them. The French, Spanish, Belgian, British, everyone took a piece.
You know what's really the worst? White supremacy. It's just, gosh, the story is so long. Damn it, white people. Damn it, you guys. Chill out.
Yeah.
You got all the stuff already. I'm sorry, continue.
No, not at all.
I like to interrupt with white supremacy every now and then.
So these European powers created a de facto racial hierarchy, with whites at the top and black Africans on the bottom. In South Africa, the apartheid government forced millions of people to relocate. There were restrictions on movement, on employment. Everybody felt the effects.
My name is Philip Kosana. I've just turned 80 now.
Wow, happy birthday.
Thank you.
So, Jean, this is Philip Kosana. He was born around the same time as your mom, and he was an early leader of the Pan-Africanist Congress. It was a political party fighting for equal rights for Black South Africans. Kosana himself is a Black South African, and because of that, he was forced to carry the main tool the government used to enforce apartheid, the passbook.
Yeah.
The passbook, it was a document the size of 2 passports. And by law, you had to carry it on your person at all times. As soon as you move out of your gate, you must feel the weight of this document in your pocket.
AJ, it's too early for this.
The passbook dictated where Black South Africans were allowed to travel. If you were caught without your passbook, you would very likely be arrested. The threat was enough to push people to extremes.
This guy who was working in Johannesburg in a big factory where in the morning when they arrived at the factory, they would have to take off their jackets and hang them in the cloakroom. And he had left his pass inside his jacket there. And somewhere around 10 o'clock, there was this siren which rang to say the factory was on fire and everybody was running out. And when this guy was outside, he realized that his most valuable document was in his jacket and the factory was burning and he had to decide whether to dive into the flames to go and save his pass.
Oh my God.
The pass being so powerful, he decided to dive into the flames. Of course, he died.
The pressure that apartheid put on South Africans was overwhelming. But in 1960, the slightest possibility of hope appeared. Big changes were happening across the continent.
So 1960 looked very promising for many Africans.
This is Dr. Azaria Mbuguni. He's a professor of African history at Lane College. On January 1st, 1960, African colonies start winning independence at an astonishing rate. First, it's Cameroon, then Senegal. A few weeks later, Togo wins its independence from France.
All in all, 17 African countries won independence in the course of 1960.
1960 becomes known as the Year of Africa, the year when Africans across the continent would finally be governed by Africans, not white European minorities, which for South Africa would have meant the end of apartheid, something even European leaders were starting to acknowledge.
We have seen the awakening of national consciousness in peoples who have for centuries lived in dependence upon some other power.
That's Harold Macmillan, the British Prime Minister. He'd arrived in Cape Town to deliver a warning to the all-white South African Parliament. What's happening everywhere else? It's coming here, too.
The wind of change is blowing through this continent. And whether we like it or not, this growth of national consciousness is a political fact. And we must all accept it as a fact.
For people like Philip Kosana, the one who told us about the passbooks, it felt like the winds of change were blowing right at their backs. There was hope. Hope that they could end apartheid. 1 month after Harold Macmillan's speech, they took action. In March of 1960, Philip Kosana and other activists planned a day of coordinated marches in cities and townships all across the country. Kosana led a march in a black township called Langa with a few thousand people. He gave protesters one very simple instruction about what to do with their passbooks.
Just to leave them at home and to walk straight to the police station in small groups and there to go and to surrender ourselves for arrest.
They all walked to the police stations without their passbooks and offered to turn themselves in. But the police refused to arrest them. There were too many. But that night, protesters called a meeting to figure out their next move.
As I was moving towards where the meeting was, the police opened fire, killing 5 of us. And by the time I reached the scene of the shooting, it was all commotion, and we had to pick up those who had been killed.
What's worse, Langa wasn't the only tragedy. At the protest in Sharpeville, the death toll was even higher. Here's a written account by a journalist who was there.
We heard the chatter of a machine gun, then another, then another. One woman was hit about 10 yards from our car. Her companion, a young man, went back when she fell. He thought she had stumbled. Then he turned her over and saw that her chest had been shot away. He looked at the blood on his hand and said, "My God, she's gone." Hundreds of kids were running too. Some of the children, hardly as tall as the grass, were leaping like rabbits. Some were shot too. Still, the shooting went on. Most of the bodies were strewn on the road, running through the field. When the shooting started, it did not stop until there was no living thing in the huge compound in front of the police station.
At least 69 people died. News spread around the globe. It became known as the Sharpeville Massacre. After Sharpeville, the apartheid regime clamped down completely. It instituted a state of emergency, outlawed the black political parties like Philip Kosana's. And even those in-between places that felt like a refuge, places like the jazz clubs where your mother performed, they disappeared too. She said the government realized this kind of music was bringing people together, and that could be dangerous.
We couldn't even work weekends in the white areas. We couldn't do that anymore because they said no more colored artists, no more African artists going into the clubs. And we didn't have our own nightclubs, and we didn't have our own spaces where we could play. And that is when we knew we would either have to shut up completely or we'd have to leave.
So, Jean, your mom and dad did leave in 1962. They eventually landed in New York City. And in hearing this story, Jean, it's clear there's so much heartache wrapped up in your mom's years in South Africa. And it's a heartache she channeled into her music.
I've been gone
sisters. You know, it's a cry, it's a pain. It's about joy, it's about pain. And the pain is the same in South Africa.
I'm home to stay.
Ah, damn it. There we go. There go the tears. Not in a sad way. I haven't heard her voice in a long time. Her biggest joy came out of composing and creating and recording. There are some people who can say that when you're creating and doing those kinds of things, it's filling a void. But I think she was overflowing with so many things that she just had to keep making things and keep making more.
Do you feel that is the same with you? Do you feel like you're overflowing?
I think I always tried to jump into new things, but I also think I do that because I know that she didn't necessarily have all the opportunity to do all those things. I think I try to make up for a lot of what she couldn't do.
Africa.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll meet two family members who took a very different approach to activism in South Africa.
Squarespace, they'll help you make a website.
This episode of Twice Removed is brought to you by Squarespace. Wedding season is right around the corner. And in these modern times, building a website devoted to your big day is just as important as creating a guest list. Thankfully, a website takes much less time to assemble. Squarespace makes it easy to display your love story with their specially designed wedding templates. The templates provide a variety of ways to showcase your engagement photos, your story, wedding itinerary, and more. You can even use Squarespace to set up a joint email address and help streamline the planning process. Plus, you can now integrate your wedding registry on Squarespace thanks to their partnership with Zola. Zola is a universal wedding registry that makes it easy for you to request a multitude of products. That means you can ask guests for anything from nesting bowls to a fund for your honeymoon. To get started on your wedding website, blog, or online store, visit squarespace.com and use the code TWICEREMOVED for 10% off your purchase. That's squarespace.com, promo code TWICEREMOVED for 10% off. Squarespace. Make your next move. Welcome back to Twice Removed, the show that proves we are, in fact, one big family. Jean, we just heard about the moment your family decided to leave South Africa during apartheid. Now, we're going to hear about two people who tried to use labels to their advantage. So, look over here at this family map. We're going to start at your mom, Satima, and we're going to go just 2 steps, 1, 2, and we land on her grandparents. That's your great-grandparents. To start, we have a handwritten letter from 1911. We do. It is quite amazing. And framed.
Oh my God! Can you put the sound of, that screaming goat? Can you just put that as all my responses? Oh, this is insane.
And this is written by your great-grandfather, Edward Henry. Here is the letter. To his worship, the mayor and council. Dear sirs, I am instructed to write in accordance with a resolution passed in our meeting held on the 17th of this month, asking you to consider the just claims of colored ratepayers as to bathing facilities in connection with the proposed borough swimming baths. I am yours faithfully, E.M. Henry, Secretary. Basically, your great-grandfather is asking that colored taxpayers should have access to swimming pools, which they help.
Right. He was great. And his very nice penmanship.
It was very polite, but there's an undercurrent.
But it says, hey, mother, I'm paying my taxes. Why the can't we swim?
Right.
So that's good.
I like it. Between the lines. But Jean, buried in this letter, there are decades of South African politics at play. Politics your great-grandparents played a huge part in. Jean, do you know anything about your great-grandparents?
No. Tell me everything.
Here we go. They were solidly middle class. Edward was an upholsterer.
I like to upholster.
You like it too?
I do.
Yeah, I think you're very DIY.
Yeah.
Your great-grandmother, Francesca de la Cruz, she was a kindergarten teacher and later a music teacher.
My mom went into teaching as well.
Exactly. And she'd do these little operettas alongside a violinist.
That's great. I would go see that show.
And there's one other thing about them.
They would have been identified as colored.
That's my cousin, Yvette.
You got it.
I know that voice.
That was not your mystery cousin.
No.
Okay, just so you know. She's Francesca and Edward's great-granddaughter, just like you. And Yvette says the word colored means something very specific in South Africa.
So if you weren't white and you weren't black, you were then called colored. And if you came from Cape Town, you were called Cape Colored. I'm known as Cape Colored. And if Jean was still living in South Africa, she'd be identified as Cape Colored as well.
So, Jean, in the last story, we heard about the racial hierarchy during apartheid. But in the early 1900s, your great-grandparents' time, that hierarchy wasn't as rigid. White people were still at the top, colored people in the middle, and black people at the bottom. But with the right education or the right career, colored people could make their way into the upper classes. You see, South Africa wasn't even a country yet. The British were fighting the Dutch settlers for control over that land. And the British needed help. So they recruited black and colored South Africans to fight. And they made them a promise.
The British are promising Africans and colored people that they will get equal rights with a British victory.
This is Vivian Bickford Smith. And he's
I wasn't going to say that.
You wouldn't guess that.
Vivian.
Yeah, he is not the mystery cousin either. He's an emeritus professor of history at the University of Cape Town.
Equal rights, and this is using, the exact words of the time, equal rights for all civilized men.
Equal rights for all, black, colored, white, it didn't matter.
Yes, but civilized is the weasel word there. I mean, it's basically saying people who are Western educated, who live in respectable fashion, will get the vote.
With the help of colored and black South Africans, the British do win the fight. But they don't keep their promise.
Surprise.
There's the
Surprise, you guys.
White people made up only about a quarter of the entire population, but they had all the political power. And they kept finding excuses not to fulfill their promise.
The ground was always shifted. The goalposts were always moved. The idea is if you went on being respected, yes, in time, we'll look at it.
And what was the reaction when the British reneged on their promise?
Well, it was one of enormous despair and disillusionment.
But also determination. A group of colored South Africans come together to start a political organization. It's the first of its kind to fight for the rights of colored people. It's called the APO, the African Political Organization, which gets us back to the letter at the beginning of the story, the one written by your great-grandfather, Edward. The letterhead says African Political Organization, right there on the top left of the page. So Jean's family really was on the forefront of political action in modern South Africa.
Absolutely. Very much so.
One thing that struck me about this letter is just the tone. It's so genteel and polite.
It's done incredibly respectfully. I mean, it's saying, just take us seriously.
The British had promised equal rights to so-called civilized people. So the APO decided they're going to be so civilized, the British cannot weasel out of their promise. The APO, they put on concerts, they lobbied for access at the local theater. Your great-grandfather, Edward, he gave out attendance prizes at the local school.
Wow.
But the British didn't keep their promise. The offer of equal rights was just a strategy to divide non-white South Africans. If upper-class colored people felt more civilized than other South Africans, the disenfranchised groups wouldn't unite, and the British could keep power.
That's always the game. That's always the game. It's divide and conquer, and keep everybody fighting amongst themselves. And you're like, all right, well, we'll just go keep on doing this while you guys are bickering with each other and killing each other off.
In his letter, your great-grandfather is asking for swimming pool access for colored people. But not all colored people, just the ones who paid taxes, the elite. All right, so fast forward 3 generations. Same family, same swimming pools. We asked Edward's great-granddaughter, that's your cousin Yvette, what were those pools like when she was growing up under apartheid?
You weren't allowed to come into the public swimming pools because they were for white people only. Unless you were a doctor or a teacher or worked in government, you had access to swimming pools, but during designated periods.
It's crazy to think that what your great-grandparents would have seen as real progress, getting some swimming pool access for some colored people, just a couple generations later, it would be seen as discrimination.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say to your great-grandpa if you could send him a message?
1, I really like the penmanship. And 2, it's easy to be conflicted now and say, well, you weren't arguing for everybody's rights. You weren't arguing for you. You were just saying, hey, let us in. But then you also have to understand, and you're like, what else is it that you want us to do at this point? This is the nicest I can be. I'm paying my tax. What else do you want me to do? I'm just happy that he did something. You know, you were a part of something. You make yourself a part of history. You did something. You tried. You have to at least try.
Okay, Jean, we are on story number 3 now. We're going to go further back in time to answer your mother's question of where your family came from. So take a look here at your family map. We've got Francesca and Edward, that's your great-grandparents right here. And now we're going to go just 4 steps along the chain, a birth, a marriage, 2 generations back. We're going to visit a place that's almost a part of your family itself. A place that nearly all of your great-great-grandparents called home before South Africa. And to get there, we have to hop on a ship heading west from Cape Town to the middle of the Atlantic Ocean.
You just see water and more water. You might see a ship or 2, or 3 perhaps. But you can actually travel for 5 days without seeing anything else. And then you approach this place that sort of arises very starkly out of the ocean. Islands usually conjure up ideas of white sandy beaches and palm trees, but here you encounter a mountain arising out of the ocean, this sort of huge rock-like structure.
This is Daniel Jan. He's a professor of anthropology, and he's from this tiny island.
Is it St Helena?
It is St Helena. Exactly. So you have heard of that.
Yes.
And because so much of your family lived there, Jean, nearly all of your mother's great-grandparents, we thought maybe the island itself has part of the answer to your mom's question, where am I from?
Did you ask the island?
Yes, we interviewed the island.
And here's some videotape of the island.
So St. Helena has always had a strange and special pull, even since its discovery. Take this unbelievable but actually true story of its very first inhabitant, a Portuguese soldier named Don Fernando Lopes. While fighting in India in 1513, Lopes defected from the army.
As a punishment, he was deformed, his right hand or an ear taken off.
It was actually his right hand and both of his ears, his left thumb and his nose.
Those are very random things.
And it doesn't end there. Also, his hair and beard were scraped off with clamshells. Yes.
What?
And he was dumped onto a boat back to Portugal. Along the way, the ship made a pit stop at a small uninhabited island, St Helena. Lopez escaped into the jungle and hid in a cave.
How? Did he roll? What? It's a crazy story.
They didn't cut off his feet, just his hands and ears.
Sorry.
So
he can run, sorry.
He can run. He stayed on St Helena for 10 years. Sometimes passing ships would leave goats or fruit trees. One left a rooster. It became his friend. And Lopez became sort of a legend, a story passed along by sailors. His story reached the King of Portugal, who offered Lopez an opportunity to meet the Pope. The Pope was impressed by Lopez and offered to grant him one wish. His wish? To go back to St Helena.
For the rooster?
I Could be.
He's a good guy.
He's a good friend to that rooster. Now, by the early 18th century, there was a massive shift. St Helena had basically become the center of the world.
The South Atlantic world was a very densely occupied waterscape. I mean, that was an incredibly busy route.
Because St Helena was perfectly located as a halfway point in the Atlantic, ships traveling between Europe and the East or the Americas and Africa stopped there for fresh food and water after months at sea.
Imagine it in the middle of the Atlantic as the center of the spider's web, the nexus of these crisscrossing shipping routes.
It's during this time, Gene, that your family first shows up in the historical records. Your great-great-great-grandmother, Sophia George, she was born on St Helena in 1813, and we actually have a copy of her baptismal record.
You guys. I've never heard that name before.
No?
No. Never heard that name before. That's amazing. Whew. Okay. All right. Okay.
Okay.
Hi, Sophia.
Yeah, so in 1838, she married a man named Benjamin.
Damn it.
Have you heard of Benjamin?
No, but that's a fantastic name.
It is a fantastic name.
They didn't try. They didn't try.
Gene, at the top of the show, you told us that your mom's biggest dream was to know what she was and where she came from. But the thing about St. Helena is, no one is truly from there. Every St. Helenian's ancestors came from somewhere else. Since we couldn't find any clues on the island, Gene, a couple of months ago we had you take a DNA test. And now, Gene, we have your results.
I want to throw up. Holy shit. I'm just going to not talk for a little bit. Whew. Okay, you talk. Somebody talk. Somebody else talk. While I just stare at this.
So you can see we have two main divisions here. The first, about 45% of your DNA comes from the African continent. This is largely from your father's side of the family.
That's a lot of African.
More than you expected?
Yes.
You shared DNA with the Bantu people, one of the earliest populations known to man.
So pretty much like the first people.
The first,
like
yeah.
the people.
The people, yeah. All of our great.
So I'm mostly the people.
You are the people. You're the original.
Yeah. I'm the OA. That's what we're doing here. Okay.
The other main part of your DNA, and what we believe to be from your mother's side, comes from South and Central Asia. Gene, is very likely that your mother's side of the family arrived in St. Helena not from Africa, but from the area around India. People wound up in St. Helena in a lot of different ways. Some were traders, some were soldiers, others settlers. And one of the ways that people got to St. Helena was through the slave trade.
All right, white people, here we go again.
The slaves that were brought to St. Helena were not from Africa. Some were, but the majority were not.
Where were they from?
The Indian Ocean Basin, including India itself. some of the smaller islands that make up Indonesia now, Malaysia, and Madagascar.
Which means, Jean, that this part of your mom's family was almost certainly brought to St. Helena as slaves.
Generally, any like brown people around the world, you always expect to hear the word slaves. So I wasn't not expecting slaves today. Especially brown people in different places, and you know that their family's been there for generations. You're like, oh, so when did you guys decide to come here of your own volition and then live really uncomfortably amongst white people, I'm sure. Like, no, I'm pretty sure that somebody bought and then sold you, and there's been a lot of pain in your history. It's our world history that we have to understand has worked that way. It doesn't have to work that way in the future, but we, got to accept how a lot of us got to a lot of places.
Well, Jean, we have mostly answered your mother's question from the beginning of the show, where your family came from. But we still have a mystery relative waiting for you. Speaking of which, let's do a quick check-in. Mystery relative, how are you doing? Remember, I can hear you, but Jean cannot.
Hello, this is quite fascinating.
Had you heard of St. Helena before today?
I had
Really?
in the maritime novels of Patrick O'Brian.
Interesting.
It's a particular chapter of nerdery in which I indulge heavily.
Well, now you know you have a family connection there.
It's crazy, yeah. This is really quite edifying.
Well, sit tight. Just 2 more stories before we introduce the two of you. So, Jean, let's go back to the family map over here. Now, right here, your ancestors from St. Helena, the Benjamins. One of them married a British settler in South Africa. So we're actually crossing over to the British arm of your family now. His name was Alfred, and from Alfred we follow the map 11 steps over here to a distant cousin of his, another settler named Mary Barber. She is our next stop. Mary Barber was South Africa's first woman botanist.
What?
Yeah, she was one of the most published women scientists of her time. There are plants named after her. And she fought very much against the labels the scientific community put on women 150 years ago. It's around this time Charles Darwin publishes his theory of natural selection, which shatters people's understanding of themselves and the world around them. But for all of his progressive genius, in some ways, Darwin was stuck in the past. For example, his view of women.
He, say for instance, grants birds greater powers, if you will, than human females.
This is Tina Jonquitto. She teaches the history of science at Colorado School of Mines.
When he's talking about birds, for instance, he argues that female birds exhibit choice when it comes to the selection of a mate. And when he gets to women, he says women are not in the position of choosing their mate, but rather they are the ones that are chosen. And so this is where I think he's unable to get out of the Victorian conceptions of gender.
To much of society, botany itself reinforced Victorian gender roles. It taught women to be like flowers, passive, beautiful, and that they exist solely for reproduction. And because of that, it was pretty much the one science that women were allowed to do. But Mary Barber, and a lot of women like her, flipped all that on its head. And they used science to do it, by focusing on one particular kind of plant.
There are so many women botanists in the 19th century who are fascinated by carnivorous plants.
Why do you think that is?
I think carnivorous plants defy the conventional narrative of what a flower is supposed to do. A flower is not supposed to lure, trap, kill, and ingest quote-unquote reasoning beings. You know, they're not supposed to do this.
And so carnivorous plants bring about an important realization.
What holds true for the plant also can hold true for the human.
If women are going to be told that they should be like plants, then they're going to be like carnivorous plants.
There's something that's very appealing about carnivorous plants, metaphorically.
Yeah, flowers and plants are seen as this passive thing, but these are badass plants.
Right, these are badass plants, yeah.
Are women reading this symbolism into these plants back then the way we are now?
Yes, there's a sort of a subgenre, if you will, of carnivorous. It's a very small subgenre of carnivorous plant poetry. And many more articles about carnivorous plants that are written by women reference this idea that just as these plants are overturning conventional narratives of what a plant is, so women should overturn conventional notions of what women are supposed to do as well.
For these scientists, this was important work because these innocuous, pretty flowers suggested a new identity for the women studying them.
I know for a lot of these individual women, so much was at stake for them in either getting the vote or getting education. They believed that society would change for the better if women had access to these things.
How successful were they at changing that conversation?
We love grand narratives and narratives that change a course of history. And I think when we're looking at women, particularly women in science in the 19th century, I'm not so sure that the grand narrative is where we need to look. There are a lot of minor victories. I think that just their mere presence as botanical workers is pretty remarkable.
So botany sort of flattened the world and helped women be equal, at least in one small way, to men.
Yeah, exactly. And it gave them access to a world outside the home. You know, it enlarged their world pretty significantly.
So there is your carnivorous plant loving ancestor.
Sounds about right.
How so?
It's a very, very long line of women who are like, no, we're not going to do that. And also we're delicate flowers.
You're both.
And also, I'll f***ing kill you. Good job.
Perfect.
Good job, Mary.
Now, before we move on, history is complicated, so I should note that although Mary Barber had many good qualities, she was the first woman botanist recognized in South Africa, almost certainly there were women studying the land before she was there. So when Barber and her fellow settlers moved in, they took away land from the local Xhosa population, and those people were surely studying those plants that Mary would later go on to write about. So in short, minor victories for some can also be losses for others.
Yeah. Damn it, Mary. Gentrifying ass Mary with a goddamn plant.
Jean, we've done it. We've made it through your family tree to the last stop before your mystery relative. Occasionally, Jean, one person can force an entire family to confront its history, to question who they are and where they came from. That's what happened with our final relative. She's 20 steps from Mary Barber, 9 marriages, a bunch of kids, and her name is Nanny Stafford. Nanny died in 1933, but her great-granddaughter is still alive. Her name is Yvette, like your cousin, coincidentally, and she lives in southern England.
I fight old age with a vengeance, I do. For my 60th birthday, I had a tattoo.
Oh, really?
Yep.
Of what?
I had a little flower. It's on my shoulder. And it was lovely. I'm thrilled with it.
I love her already.
Yvette lives in a rural town in Cornwall where the population is 99% white, Yvette's family included.
I'm very white. Just white.
But years ago, there was this one thing.
The only thing, my nephew, he was born very white skin, but he had very, very curly hair. And he looked like, you know the singer Prince?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
He looked like him.
Oh, that's interesting.
We did think then, I wonder.
Growing up, Yvette didn't know much about her great-grandmother Nanny. She hadn't even heard many stories about her. Until one night, about a decade ago.
My mother was staying with my sister for Christmas, and right out of the blue, she said, "Your great-grandmother was black." So my sister said, "What?"
Yvette was shocked. If she didn't know something that basic about her great-grandmother, what other secrets were still out there? She called in some professional help.
Yes, my name is Tracy Castle, and I'm a historian.
Tracy is a historian of 19th century America. Also, her mother happens to be Yvette's neighbor. Yvette gathered up the few records she could find about Nanny Stafford and asked Tracy to do some digging, report back if she found anything interesting.
And I started to have a look at it and started coming across some things that were, well, they just looked a little bit odd. I wasn't expecting to go across the Atlantic, much less to a slave plantation on a coastal island of Georgia.
This is the story that Tracy uncovered. In 1853, Nanny Stafford was born on a plantation in Georgia. Her father was a slave owner named Robert. Her mother was a slave named Judah. Nanny was enslaved from the moment she was born. At the onset of the Civil War, she was sent north to New Jersey, a free state. Nanny was adopted by an abolitionist couple. When she was older, she applied to the newly formed Howard University Medical School, and she got in and received her medical degree, one of the first black women in the country ever to achieve such a feat. She was only 13 years removed from life as an enslaved person. But even after all she had accomplished, she still encountered more barriers. In the 1870s, it was incredibly difficult for a woman to practice medicine in the United States. She eventually opened her own clinic in Germany, a sanitarium for women and children. She took treatments reserved mostly for the wealthy and made them accessible to everyone, even the poor. For this, the town where she lived gave her an award. A Catholic church there set aside a whole day to praise her and thank God for her work.
Hell yeah, Nanny. Damn, I am not doing enough in my life. God.
She married a man, a white musician named Gustav. They had a son who married a white woman. They had a daughter who married a white man. They had a daughter, and they named her Yvette. Nanny died in the 1930s, and by the time Yvette learned anything about the family's racial history, almost all personal records of Nanny Stafford's life had been erased.
After Nanny's death, there was a big bonfire and all the paperwork was burned.
And so Nanny Stafford, born a slave, educated at Howard, celebrated for her medical work, her story was hidden away. Yvette has really come to admire Nanny. She keeps a photo of her in the living room.
She's really stunning. It was taken on her wedding day. It's profile. She was wearing a veil and like her lacy dress. I think I've got her wedding ring.
You have Nanny's wedding ring?
I think. And my mother always said that it belonged to her grandmother.
What does it look like?
Very, very thin. It's a platinum one. And of course, being worn for so many years, it's very, very thin. Quite big. She had quite big fingers.
And how about your fingers?
They were smaller, but they're certainly not small. I'm quite a chunky little thing, I am.
Where do you keep it now?
I keep it in a jewelry box upstairs. I do put it on and look at it and just wonder. Makes me feel close to her. I would just love to be like her.
That was so beautiful. One thing, if you've got black in your family, it's coming back. It's going to show up. That black is strong. That black will come out generations later. It's great that, thank you for telling me all these stories of these, women who are just like, we're going to understand where we came from and not deny any of that, but still use that and say, we're going to do what we want. We're going to change the world.
Okay, Jean, we have made it. We have traveled through your family tree past 51 relatives. We're back in the present, and we are ready to meet your mystery relative. Are you ready?
I am ready.
Well, we are ready. Right after these words from our sponsors.
You bastards.
"23andMe, spit into a tube and see."
This episode of Twice Removed is brought to you by 23andMe. Did you know that genetically, we're all 99.5% the same? Wouldn't you like to know more about what's in that 0.5%? With 23andMe, you can. 23andMe gets its name from the 23 pairs of chromosomes that make up your DNA. And those chromosome pairs contain a lot of information, like where in the world you came from. You can even see how DNA affects your likelihood to consume more caffeine or be a deep sleeper. So, how does 23andMe work? You simply purchase a kit on their website, 23andme.com. When the test arrives, you provide a saliva sample by spitting into a tube. The best part, once your DNA has been analyzed, you'll get to learn more about what makes you, you. To order your kit today, visit 23andme.com. That's the number 23, ANDME.com.
23andMe.
All right, everybody, welcome back to Twice Removed. We have spent this episode exploring the family of Jean Grae. We've gone to South Africa, to the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, and back to South Africa. And now, we are ready to meet your mystery relative, Jean. From Nanny Stafford, we go 6 generations back in time, through 4 marriages, and then travel another 11 generations forward in time to land at the present, at your mystery relative, who is in a studio on the other side of the country. We have him pulled up on a laptop here. Screen is covered with a blanket. Mystery relative, what do you have to say for yourself?
It's scary in here.
Are you ready? I'm going to count down from 3. 3, 2, 1. The blanket is off and...
It did sound like you. That's crazy. Hello, Nick Offerman.
Hi there.
Hi.
Nick Offerman, perhaps most famous for his role as Ron Swanson in Parks and Recreation.
My love, flannel and also meats. Makes much more sense.
There you go.
Okay, so how does this work?
Oh, I can give you the exact way you're related. Are you ready? Jean, Nick Offerman is your 4th great-grandmother's husband's 3rd great-grandfather's daughter's husband's 3rd great-aunt's grandson's wife's 4th great-granddaughter's husband, of course.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Exactly.
That's what I was gonna say.
Makes a lot of sense.
We have met once before, and it's something that stayed with me because I walked in the room and I hugged everybody. And then I was like, I feel like maybe he's not necessarily a hugger, and I didn't ask you, and I thought it was a forced hug.
I love hugging.
So it was just me.
Well, I have a weird thing where I'm super soft and sensitive. I'm like a flower that enjoys eating meat.
Nick, tell me a little about your family. What are some similarities and differences in your ancestry with Jean's?
The things that jumped out at me, they resonated less with my family and more with me personally, because I have this wonderful family in Illinois, and to a person, they are school teacher, librarian, nurse, paramedic, a handful of farmers. They're all these wonderful, hardworking public servants, and I inexplicably just had to go to showbiz and dance for the people.
Are you the only one, like, in your close family that does show business or in entertainment? Is everybody else not?
Yeah, as a bit of an iconoclast, kind of had to go my own way. It's gratifying to hear that that's possibly genetic to an extent.
So what resonated with you? What surprised you?
Well, I'm less affected by any particular detail than by the sum total of this experience, that truly shows we're all the same, we're all in the same family. So why are we acting like such jackasses here in this country?
I'm really happy that you brought up, the DNA test. That's an amazing thing to do, to understand that it's not just me and my close-knit family that I just know about. And maybe if we all actually really do the research and find out that we are connected in that way, that we would feel less of the need to be assholes to everyone all the time because it's your family. We are, kind of being held back by not really looking at ourselves and dealing with the problems from the past so that we can all grow and evolve. Because it's the future already. We can't do this and then also have jetpacks at the same time. That's f***ing silly.
Jean, let me just ask you before we wrap up. How'd we do? Did we answer your mom's question, do you think?
Yes. I think she would be very, very excited to see these strong women. A lot of it was not understanding how strong she was and how much she was breaking rules and breaking boundaries by just existing and doing what she was doing and writing the kind of things she was doing. And she was a freedom fighter. But I think she always felt like she wasn't as strong. So I think this would be a really beautiful thing for her to say, I come from, a line of these strong women who wouldn't take any who had carnivorous ass gentrifying plans.
Well, thank you. And I'm glad that we were able to introduce two distant relatives.
I'm incredibly gratified, and it's like being told that you're related to a hero. And so I feel much taller today.
Next time we meet, I'm hugging the shit out of you.
Yes, please. See you soon, fam.
I'll see you soon.
Twice Removed is produced by Meg Driscoll, Ngofeen Mputubwele, Chris Neary, Audrey Quinn, and Kimmie Regler. Our senior producer is Eric Mennel. Editing by Jorge Just and Alex Blumberg. Michelle Harris is our fact-checker. Music and sound design by Haley Shaw, with additional mixing by Martin Paralta. Additional music by Blue Dot Sessions. Special thanks to Basil George, Colin Fox, Damien Samuels, the archives on St Helena, CeCe Moore, Andy Kill, Tanja Hammel, Patricia McCracken, Dr. Sean Field, Mark Adams, Cherie Bush, Adam Brown, Eowyn Langholf, Ryan Willan, and Andrew Lumby. Voice casting by NYC VO coach Shelly Shenoy. Carol Muller is author of Musical Echoes, South African Women Thinking in Jazz. Extra thanks to Caitlin Kenney, Stevie Lane, Ale Lariu, Kevin Turner, Kelly Coonan, Katelyn Bogucki, and all the lovely people around Gimlet who helped get this show off the ground. Plus Harrison Topp, Chris Wright, Rebecca Heyman, John Anderson, and Terry Raymond. Bonnie Antosh and Jeremy Lloyd sing our jingles. You can email us at twiceremoved@gimletmedia.com. We tweet at Twice Removed. We're also on Facebook. Get in touch. Seriously, we'd really like to hear from you. If you're a fan of the show, we would love it if you could rate or review us on iTunes. It makes a big, big difference, and it's really one of the best ways to help others find out about us. So hop on iTunes or your podcast app and let us know what you think. Twice Removed is a production of Gimlet Media. I'm AJ Jacobs. Thank you for listening. It's been wonderful getting to know you this season. Special thanks this week to Family Tree Magazine. With Family Tree Magazine, you can unlock exciting discoveries about your own family tree. How? The editors of Family Tree Magazine can walk you through 48 secrets to searching for your roots online. Get started now and download their free ebook at familytreemagazine.com/ancestry. That's familytreemagazine.com/ancestry. Thanks to our sponsor, Squarespace. To get started on your website, blog, or online store, visit squarespace.com and use the code TWICEREMOVED for 10% off your purchase. That's squarespace.com, promo code TWICEREMOVED for 10% off. Squarespace. Make your next move. Special thanks this week to Family Tree Magazine. With Family Tree Magazine, you can unlock exciting discoveries about your own family tree. How? The editors of Family Tree Magazine can walk you through 48 secrets to searching for your roots online. Get started now and download their free ebook at familytreemagazine.com/ancestry. That's familytreemagazine.com/ancestry.